Good afternoon, everyone. I am so glad and happy to see you all here. I'm Darren Walker, and I have the great privilege of moderating this panel with two remarkable women who are working to do something radical in America. And we're going to hear from the great art patroness, Alice Walton, and Cray Bill, who is the CEO of Art Bridges. And I want to start by just situating this moment we're in a time when we need art more than ever. We know the healing effects of art. We know that through exposure to the art, empathy, critical thinking skills, an ability to see in others yourself. All of these qualities we need in our leaders, we need in the citizenry. And I think the idea that undergirds, Alice, your vision, and we'll start, Alice, with the idea that has, in so many ways, informed and animated your philanthropy. Of course, Alice is a dear friend, and she doesn't like it when I do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Alice, you are undoubtedly the most prolific, generous, impactful arts patron in the country today. And of course, it's easy to talk about people who are arts patrons, people who buy a lot of art, or people who give money and they have their name on a building of a museum. But I'm talking about deep, authentic engagement with artists and with communities. And the idea that animates your philanthropy is this very simple notion that everyone in this country deserves art, and that it ought not be something for the privileged. It ought not be something for those of us on the East and West Coast to hoard. And that in order for our democracy to flourish, everyone needs exposure to art. And so I want to get to the vision. But before we do that, I just want you to talk about your own upbringing and exposure in Bentonville, Arkansas, to art.
Right. Well, I wouldn't be talking long, I guess, if I have to talk about that, because there was no access to art. But I grew up there in a little town of 2,000 people. It's grown a lot since then. And it was a great childhood. I mean, I got to ride my horses through the streets and tear down all the clotheslines in the backyard and had a lot of fun. But art was not a part of my life. We had no art courses in school. We had no art teachers, and we had no museums or really access. To go to a museum was a 3-hour drive. But my mom made sure to take us occasionally to Kansas City. That was 8 hours at the time. Tulsa was 3 hours. And I remember as a child feeling, I was in awe, but I felt like I didn't belong there, that it wasn't really for me. And I guess those early feelings really shaped a lot about where we've gone with Crystal Bridges, with Art Bridges.
Just to say, some of the work you're seeing on the monitors is the brilliant vision of Crystal Bridges and also Art Bridges and the amazing work there. But I commend this museum to you as the absolute snob New Yorker that I am about art. There is nothing better than Crystal Bridges. But continue.
Thank you.
You didn't think you belonged.
I didn't think I belonged, and I guess that stuck with me my whole life. I understand how people that really don't grow up with access to art, either because there's an admission that their family can't afford, or there's no transportation, or they live in rural America and they have no access. So I really get that, and I guess it's what's motivated me is, can we create art museums that are warm and welcoming?
And was that
For
your vision
everyone.
for Crystal Bridges? Because it's
was.
free to the public.
Yes, we have to have free museums, at least the permanent collections, if we expect people to come, because otherwise we become an elite institution. And I think, if there's one thing in the world I'd love to see changed, hopefully maybe through some of our efforts, Ann, it's that art people, the trustees, the communities will understand how valuable and how important it is to have free access to museums, and do what it takes to create that free access, because that's the only way you have equality, and you can change the dynamics of the museum industry as it is currently constituted in most places. Those with money get to go, those without don't. And so I think the issue of free is one of the other major thing that has driven me, because it's all about access for everyone.
And one of the things I really appreciate about you from 12 years ago when I first met you, and we actually, you had convened with Thelma Golden at the Studio Museum in Harlem, the old Studio Museum.
Yeah.
A meeting of arts leaders, and this is the thing, when Alice Walton says come to a meeting, everyone in the arts community and philanthropy shows up. But the theme that you and Thelma wanted to talk about was diversifying the curatorial ranks of American museums.
And the management, right?
And the management and operation. So speak to why that was such a passion, and why, and of course this has really taken off, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So, when we opened Crystal Bridges in 2011, all I could pray for was to get the doors open and hope somebody would come in. We had no idea what would happen. And the last thing, frankly, that I was thinking about was, diversity. It wasn't on my radar. Shame on me. I had other things on my radar, I guess, in trying to open the museum. But about 2 years in, and Ann was a part of all this, she was head of our education at Crystal Bridges, and actually built one of the great education programs in the country there. But 2 years in, we looked at our visitorship and realized that we weren't getting all our audiences that we should. We were too white, we were too old, and so we started looking at ourselves, and we realized, this was 2014, Darren, we realized that people are not going to come if they can't relate to what's on the walls, if they can't see themselves in what's in the paintings, if they can't transpose themselves into those paintings. And so we started in 2014 a real effort we had a great collection of women artists, because I'm a value person, right? And who was undervalued? Women. So we had really good women artists. But we lacked the diversity that we should have in other areas. So we really made a focus of that for the next 3 years. We also did a lot of community outreach to the churches and the African American community and the Latino community. And in 2 years, we totally turned around the color of. You want to talk about it, Ann? You were right in the middle of it.
Sure. I mean, well, I'll back up a little bit and talk about opening Crystal Bridges. I think there was a lot of skepticism, right, on the coasts. I remember bringing this opportunity to my former mother-in-law. There's a reason for that. And she...
This is going to be a real conversation, okay? In case you
and she said, Arkansas, where's that? And she went and got a children's puzzle of the United States to figure out where it was. But I just thought here's this woman who's created this institution, a world-class collection and facility in her hometown because she believes everybody deserves access to art. And I sort of joked at the time that if she could say, "Come on in, y'all," that's what she would say, you know, to have this like welcoming. But I also think Alice created Crystal Bridges with all the K-12 students in mind. That was really her core audience. And so when we created, the first endowment Crystal Bridges received was for school programs. So every child, and I remember signing check requests for buses that were like $3,000 because they were coming from North Carolina, right? They got charter buses and they raised the money to stay overnight. And I remember for some of these students, it was the first time that they got onto an elevator. And then they descended into this magical place. And we ended up, you know, we had for one of the only times in the history of building, you know, a field trip program, we had this population who had never had field trips before. So we actually studied, what's the impact? Because throughout my entire career, I would beg administrators, I have funding, I can tell you all these anecdotes, but I just didn't have any empirical evidence about the benefits. And finally, we had the opportunity to do a randomized control trial, like a medical trial, looking at the effects of visiting a museum and the impacts that it has on K-12 students. And you could argue 1 hour out of their life, it's not going to be much. The impacts were huge, and they were even bigger for students from rural communities. So you saw increases in tolerance. Lots of things we've been talking about today with the pursuit of happiness and leadership, this idea that we've got to value diversity. So increases in tolerance, increases in critical thinking, increases in their observational skills, and also increases in coming back. So we did a little behavioral study to see, would they actually bring their adults back? Because you could argue, they've just been here. This isn't novel or new anymore. But they would then bring their parents back and kind of serve as the ambassador. And so I think it's those programs, those efforts, the collection, all of that to really create this very inclusive institution that truly embodies trying to be a place for where all are welcome.
And do you think, as you both look back on Crystal Bridges, because now Crystal Bridges was so successful, beyond your wildest dreams, you've had to double the size. So you have this vision, Alice, that you are like Andrew Carnegie in Pittsburgh in 1892. I mean, you're taking this place that not many people go to, and you're going to make it a destination. We'll get to the other part of your philanthropy, the health part, later. But do you see Crystal Bridges, the expansion, the momentary, which we should also talk about, as part of a sort of larger gestalt that you truly want to make Bentonville this arts destination?
I really do. And, people have always had a tendency to look down on Arkansas if they even know the name or know how to spell it or have to get out a map to find it.
They don't think it's Alaska.
Yeah. So one of my goals was really to create a place that could help boost pride in the community. And it really was all about that. That was one of my key goals. And to give kids access that I never had. That, as I learned to know and love art, I wish so deeply that I'd had that background. But the kids are what we're all about, and I think that community, pride in community, the economic development, the economic impact it has had. The arts can do so much for a community. And one of the things that I really hope is that people can look at what's happened in our little town and understand the multiple impacts and the positive impacts that a thriving art community can have in a region, both economically, both educationally. It's really important, and so that's kind of what spawned Art Bridges.
Well, and that's what, for you, the economic and the cultural has created, this energy there when you go to Bentonville that is pretty palpable. But part of what art, I think you've done at Crystal Bridges, is do some radical programming. There was a show that was commissioned by the Tate, and it was called Soul of a Nation, and it was the first really comprehensive exhibition of Black art in America in the 60s and 70s. And I recall, because the Ford Foundation supported the show at the Tate, and having a conversation with the director then, who said, we can't get an American venue. No American museum wants to take this show. Now, it was a radical show, but it wasn't so radical that, it would repel audiences. In Britain, it was the most successful show of the year at the Tate. But we couldn't find a museum. He called all of the names that I don't want to call, but he called them all. And I was literally having lunch with him in his office, and he said, I think we're just going to give up on this going to America. And I thought, this is just ridiculous. I called Alice from the taxi and said, Alice, here's the situation. And by the time I got to my hotel, because of course Alice, immediately being the art person, said, send me the checklist. She wanted to see the art. By the time I got to my hotel, Alice called and said, all right, I want the show. Here's the stipulation. It got to come to Crystal Bridges before it goes anywhere else in America. And I don't need your money. I'll pay for it myself. We always love hearing that at the Ford Foundation with partners. But what was amazing about this show and what it portended was it opened up the door. Again, this was 8 years ago. It opened up the door to this conversation about where Black art sits in the firmament, the arc of American art. And the fact that it was Crystal Bridges, not the Boston Museum of Fine Arts or Whitney or LACMA or the Art Institute, all the places that, quite frankly, had turned it down, that it came here. And the first critical review by Holland Carter in the New York Times was the best show in America right now is in Arkansas. And that was such, it was both an affirmation of your courage to say, I'm going to do this show, but also your sense that it has to come here first. And it's been a way in which you have operated, and I was here for that opening, and it was a destination that weekend for New Yorkers, for people from LA, but it was really the local community and the diversity. You had, as you said, more Black people in that museum in a weekend than in any art institution, in America probably. It was amazing. Yeah. But it was just such a testament to your vision. And I want to pivot to your vision around creating Art Bridges, which is a different organization in the Alice Walton web of do-gooding philanthropy. This is an idea that is rooted in the notion that you want great art to go to all sorts of places in America like Duluth and Kalamazoo and Abilene. Talk about Art Bridges and why you felt the need to create it.
So, as I said, I relate to those people that don't have access to art and don't feel comfortable in art museums. And as I've gotten to know the museum world, there are a lot of wonderful people and a lot of wonderful institutions that I've learned from and that have helped us so much. But what I really saw was that we really have not figured out our audiences. If you look at museum membership, museum attendance, it's going down every year. It's going down every year. That is not a good indicator, and the audience is old, like me. So I really am concerned about the future of museums, and I thought, well, what if we could create an organization that can help museums around the country, number one, deal with my pet peeve, which is art in storage. I have a definition of art that's, well, it just fits the way I think about it. But my definition of art is the space between, which means that paint on a canvas is not art if there's not a viewer. And so I feel I'm passionate about this storage issue and the fact that these great masterpieces are sitting there in the basement. And we have all these people around our country that have no access. So I thought, what if we can create a foundation that can help support the institutions with the great holdings and getting them out of storage and distributing them around the country where they can share with all those institutions that don't have access to that kind of art and need that kind of art. So that was the basis of Art Bridges. And I also, as I learned more about the museum industry, I learned that the big guys only talk to the big guys, and the little guys really don't talk much to each other, and the big guys and the little guys never talk. And so I thought, well, what if Art Bridges could be a medium to help bring these various groups together where they can learn from each other? And so those were kind of the dreams that when we started, and we started it in Crystal Bridges, actually, in 2017. It was part of Crystal Bridges, and then we spun it off in 19, I think.
And so maybe, and I want to shift and ask your as CEO, but part of this, Alice, is your diagnosis that we have this dichotomy of inequality in the arts ecosystem. Yes. The wealthy institutions have their networks, and those wealthy institutions have far more art than they ever exhibit.
Exactly.
And so many of the small institutions don't have collections, and they don't have the capacity necessarily to be able to put on exhibitions in an ongoing way, particularly really ambitious exhibitions. And so the idea was to, you, and again, I mean, in your humility, you are the reason they're talking to each other, right? I mean, so again, if Alice Walton says, we really, Met, MoMA, National Gallery, LACMA, Art Institute, I want you to be in a room and with me figure out how I can get out of your storage and into the museums and the cultural centers in small towns across America, and then you bring those museums in those small towns to a table as well. And you play the role of intermediary. And so Art Bridges plays that intermediation role. And then you returned because you'd left Bentonville and gone off and run several museums. And so you decided when Alice and the board reached out to you to think about coming back, you said, I think, sign me up.
Alice, the first thing she said is, I knew you'd be back. So I left. I was running the education department, but I really so admired what Crystal Bridges did, and I wanted to see if I could be that kind of change agent if I had the opportunity to be a museum director. So I went to the Westmoreland Museum of American Art, which is just outside of Pittsburgh, and we prided ourselves in being Art Bridges super partners. So we brought, and just to give you a little context about this place, this was, imagine a thriving community in the 50s and 60s when the steel industry is booming. And imagine in the 70s when that industry collapses, you have an entire generation of people that were supposed to be born there that are born somewhere else. You have a county that just feels completely forgotten. So while Pittsburgh kind of reinvented itself as eds and meds, a lot of these smaller towns just didn't. But what they did do when they were this bustling community is recognize the critical role that culture plays. So there's small towns like this all across America, right? With these small regional museums. They have incredible core collections, but then they just aren't able to continue to acquire. But what they provide is this platform for towns like Greensburg in Westmoreland County to imagine what's possible, imagine a new future. I mean, Alice has talked about this all the time, that art is hope, and you don't get to hope if you've lost your capacity to imagine. So we looked at, what's the role that this museum can play in helping to create a more welcoming community to bring in new residents, because that was something, we talk about museums with an aging population. This entire town had an aging population. What can we do to expand perspectives and drive dialogue in our community so that they can think about what their town might look like 10, 15, and kind of spark new economic engines? We could not have done that without Art Bridges. We could not have done that
What
without...
did Art Bridges provide you?
They provided us with an exhibition called Border Cantos, Sonic Border, which was an opportunity in a very conservative community to talk about immigration, which was, you'd think in rural Pennsylvania, not very important, but incredibly important if we were going to bring in a new, working class to the region in healthcare and manufacturing. And we were able to do it in a way that you talked about this earlier, Darren, nuance, right? People were able to be in this space of nuance. This is not just this black and white issue. It's really complicated. We've been trying to deal with it for decades. And so let's explore how these two artists are grappling with this issue. We brought in loans from different institutions that filled in critical gaps for us. We didn't even start collecting contemporary art until 2015, so we didn't have anything that was made from the present. And so we were able to bring in incredible loans, Carrie James Marshall, David Driscoll, just beautiful works.
Because Art Bridges has basically a facility to bring these great artists.
Well, don't mention that we don't have storage.
We don't. We don't have storage. I didn't say the word storage.
No,
That's facility.
But what we do is we partner with institutions across the country, and Art Bridges has its own collection, and we provide the strategic and financial support because it's expensive to get artwork out, and these are long-term loans. We want people to have, years to embed them in their institutions and work with them. And then I think the most important thing that we do is we also provide awards for programming that these institutions can develop in collaboration with their community. So we were able to bring so many people talking about issues around immigration and the border to the table through that strategic support that we got from Art Bridges. And then access. So Crystal Bridges was founded on the premise of free admission, and that's another thing that we're really trying to drive is financial barriers are real. And it's, one of the things that we really need to knock down. And as an economic, business model for museums, we saw during COVID, institutions that were really dependent on earned income and ticket sales suffered the most and have yet to rebound. And we've got to continue to drive the value proposition of what's the public good that these institutions are providing to community that is a philanthropic rather than a transactional endeavor.
When you think about some of the many exhibitions across the country that Art Bridges has done, for both of you, does anything come to mind that is a favorite or a quirky one or a really interesting exhibition and a particularly interesting place?
Yeah.
Alice?
Well, the Border Cantos exhibition, William Mizrak and Guillermo Galando.
Yeah.
Did I say that right?
Galindo, and
Galindo.
he is a character.
Yeah. That came to Crystal Bridges. It was a very inexpensive exhibition for us to put on, and it's one of the most important exhibitions we ever did. And when I saw it, I thought, this needs to go around the country. So we were able to work with the artists and actually purchase the exhibition in Art Bridges, and it has now been on the road for 8 years. Mm-hmm. And it has been one of the most, it deals with this very divisive issue in a very human way, and it doesn't take sides, but it presents the human side of immigration and really creates a beautiful way to talk about the tough issues. And to me, that is the epitome of the value of museums, is for us to be able to take a soul of the nation. Why do we not value African American artists the same way we value our 5 white Abex guys and 1 renegade woman?
Because the gatekeepers of that era, who were all white men, said, what we value are those 5 ABEX icons, and we'll let a woman in too. But that's it. And I think what's changed is that the gatekeepers today, which include you, are saying we value excellence across the firmament of American art in all of its richness and diversity. And I think that's a very different proposition for why people, and I think a much more compelling argument as to why people will want to see what's in your museum.
You know, I go back to my childhood and really why did I fall in love with art? And I started reading. I had no background in art whatsoever. I was a finance major. And I started reading art history books when I bought my first Winslow Homer watercolor because I decided it was very expensive and I better learn what I was doing. And so I literally spent 30 years reading art history books, and that's how I got my education, plus lots of smart people around me. But I think it is so important for us to realize that it's the stories and the nuances that are presented by storytelling and art that are so valuable for us as a society, particularly in this divisive time. And the Border Cantos is a perfect example. The Soul of a Nation is a perfect example.
Well, in the way the curators have installed the narrative of American art, where you have 18th century Gilbert Stuart and Peale and all of the masters of that era, next to Carrie James Marshall or Carrie Mae Weems, and that they're in the same gallery in this dialogue, which again is one of the beauties of Crystal Bridges, was you weren't tethered to some retrospective European way of looking as to how to, in a linear way, present art history. And I think it's been one of the great things. I mean, you look here at this slide, which, I mean, my goodness, this is, I mean, this is the arc of American art, portraiture, and you would never have that in any other museum presented that way, because certainly any encyclopedic museum, because there would be 5 different galleries for that. And what you really brought to life is an arc and a history that can be demonstrated in one place rather than having to walk through a lot of different floors of a museum. For you, and any particular exhibition besides the one you did?
I think there's an exhibition, Will Wilson, an Indigenous photographer, who is really challenging the photography of Edward Curtis 100 years prior to him. He's an incredible artist. He creates portraits, and it was actually one of his works is in one of these slides. But he creates portraits of Indigenous sitters and really giving them agency back. And he also incorporates technology where you can have an app where he calls them talking tintypes. And so the sitters suddenly come to life and start to tell you their story. And it's a real kind of juxtaposition in conversation with Edward Curtis, who was kind of manipulating his sitters. He was taking some clothing from
Tell
one
us who
tribe.
Edward Curtis was.
Edward Curtis was a photographer at the turn of the 20th century, and he was documenting what he thought was the quote-unquote vanishing race. And so he was, kind of romanticizing Native Americans, and again, placing clothing and artifacts and, ephemera and things that didn't even necessarily belong to the tribe. So it was very much a constructed picture. And Will Wilson is really taking that agency back as a contemporary Indigenous photographer. So it was an incredible dialogue, and we had, incredible programming that institutions have done with that, including culinary programs where there's decolonized dinners. So Chef Sean Sherman he's the Sioux, S-I-O-X, Sioux chef. And he's gone to museums and hosted these community gatherings. And so, thinking about multidisciplinary approaches too to exploring these topics through visual arts, but culinary, dance, other art forms.
While we have a chance for questions, we have mics, the runners who are going to be here. Alice, you go.
I have one last thing I want to say that I think is important. When we started Crystal Bridges, I told our architect, Moshe Softy, I said, Moshe, this is to be an art museum, but it's also to be a community center. I want it to be comfortable and inviting, and I want people to come and hang out. And that's a vastly different construct than most museums are built with. But I think that's such an important thought in terms of how we look at our museums and what they can become in the future, starting today. And that's what I hope really happens, is that through some of our work, we can help inspire and really help museums become community centers as well as art museums.
Well, I think it's one of the things you did with the architecture and the design, the normative hierarchical way you walk upstairs and you get, that's not what you do. It's a really, really welcoming place. So we've got questions down here. So, oh my goodness, we've got lots of questions. So here we've got two, and then we'll come to this side.
First of all, thank you so very much for your investment in art. I am the daughter of migrant workers. I never was exposed to art, and now my daughter, who's in college, the first thing we do when we go to a location, we find out where the art museums are, because that's the first place we're going to go. But I'm in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and I'm with New Mexico State University. And I know you just started conversations and possibly making them part of the Art Bridges program. And it's so important because when people think of New Mexico, they think of art. But that's northern New Mexico, that's Santa Fe, and that really doesn't impact southern New Mexico, whereas where Las Cruces is. We have so many rural towns and so many children that have never been exposed to that. So I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for doing that, and thank you for your investment in art, and art that reflects our faces. Because my husband's Native American, and to be able to see our faces, that's one of the things that I think I was challenged with, is I never saw myself reflected in any of the art, and nothing that we did, and I mean Latinos, was considered art. And so I just want to take this moment to just thank you for your forward thinking, and tell you that as a person who came from that background, I can appreciate you more than I do in this moment. So thank you.
Thank you. Lori.
Well, thank you.
Uh-oh.
Well, Alice, that you're a great hero and mentor of mine, so thank you, and all of you. Very quick question. So you talked about, I hate the word storage, too. I'm not even sure I can spell it, but you talked about museum storage. But what about all the individuals who are putting things in storage, either building their own, little museums or putting things? Is there any way to bring them into the Art Bridges program? I don't know the numbers at all, but my guess, and they're building more and more, and WOVO and everybody are building more storage centers. So is there any way that could happen? Do you think there's an appetite for it? I don't know. It's just
Good question.
an idea that came to me.
As more and more wealthy people collect art,
Exactly.
there are all these private storages.
Exactly, yeah.
Any
I don't know
idea
if
of
there's
whether
a-
that could possibly, we could partner with any of them? Is that a possibility, or
Do you
what
want me to
think,
take it?
You take it, Ann.
So we are exploring it. There are some individuals that have private collections that want to get them out. We just have to figure out structurally how they're organized in terms of what we can strategically and financially support. But we are in conversations with some folks because I think anybody who collects art, it's like Alice says, they want people to see it and enjoy it and seek pleasure from it. And the last thing that a donor wants to do when they give an institution a piece of art is think that it's just going to languish in storage for 20 years and not be enjoyed. So.
Yes. Questions over here? Yes, ma'am, please, and then we'll come down.
Hello. Hi, my name is Tina. I am from a very small town in Arkansas, and I work for the Walton Family Foundation. My dream was to see a Basquiat in person, and the first time I saw it was at Crystal Bridges in 2017. So thank you so much, Alice. And if you want to come to Bentonville, the airport code is XNA. We would love to have you in Bentonville. Come on down. I love that you talked about diversity. I know that you have funded quite a few historically Black colleges, and I wanted to see if you could talk about your work with Fisk and Morehouse and Spelman so that the crowd could hear about that.
Yeah. So Alice, you have this big panoply, a portfolio of HBCUs you've supported. Some are public and some I know have been very quiet, but.
Yeah, we have a beautiful lady in the room today from Miami-Dade College. And so one of the things we've done with my foundation is try to work with various community colleges and colleges that have a highly diverse student group and reinstitute art programming and art majors to try to get more diversity in the museum field. And that's another lesson we learned at Crystal Bridges. People need to see themselves not only on the walls, but they need to see themselves and people like them as employees of the museum. And so I really think it's important to do everything we can to encourage more diverse museum leadership, curatorial, and we've got to learn how to get out into the communities where this can become an opportunity. But so Miami-Dade College.
So you've really done both HBCUs and Hispanic serving, like Miami-Dade, which I think is so important and in some ways is a differentiator for you because there are not many arts patrons who are supporting Hispanic serving colleges and community colleges and historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs. And I think it's I hope it's, what we've always talked about is that it could be an incentive to other arts patrons because we have the same level of inequality. People give beautiful things and curatorial endowments to the FOG at Harvard or to the Mellon Galleries at Yale when we really need at these other institutions that kind of endowment and support, which you provided to many, but you've been pretty singular at this point, unfortunately. Yes, we have other questions on this side. Yes, please. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. I had a question around supporting artists themselves. I know I'm involved with some arts nonprofits in Cleveland, Ohio, where I live, and I know that artists and people in creative industries were one of the hardest hit during COVID, and there have been some small guaranteed income programs for artists and creative workers, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts on better ways that our country could be supporting artists and people in creative industries to have more sustainable careers, because obviously it is a very unstable and volatile one sometimes.
The art world and particularly the galleries and art dealers are a very small group of people that really control the destiny of all artists, almost. And so one of the things we did at Crystal Bridges was start an exhibition called State of the Art. And we traveled 2 curators for a year to 48 states, visited 1,200 artists' studios, and of those selected 104 artists. And it was a really groundbreaking exhibition because artists live everywhere. And the way the current structure is, what I'd like to see is there a way to broaden the highway for artists? Right now, it's one lane, and it's New York and LA, pretty much. And so that, we do state of the art every 2 years, every 3 years, something like that. And and a lot of those artists have gone on and really received recognition, and that makes me super proud. But what I'd like to see is other museums. The other thing I've learned is that so many museums don't support the artists in their own region. And I don't know what we can do, Ann, to help change that dynamic, but that's part of the problem. And what I would encourage you all to do is to look at your museums that you're close to, and is there a way they can create some programs to really recognize regional art and artists. But I think that's something that the museum industry needs to really zero in on, because we can make a vast difference in the way this narrow little thread that goes up to the sky but leaves everybody else down here is kind of what we have today. Good question.
Part of it, Alice, as well, is as a collector, as has always been the case back to the Medicis, people look to collectors, to you, to Agnes Gunn, to others, and to say, what are they collecting? And so one of the ways you and Aggie and others support, particularly young and artists of color and women artists, is by buying their work.
Yeah.
And that's the highest validation you can give to an artist, and both materially, and that has a sustained impact. Because you can do a $20,000 grant, but if you spend $20,000 on a painting, it's likely that your name being added to the provenance or to the collection will have a multiplier effect longer term, because the next painting that sells is not going to sell for $20,000 after Alice Walton has bought it. And so that's one of the really important things that I know you've done. And, you know, you never, I mean, but you, let's just say you've been a prolific collector, and in doing so, you have really helped elevate a lot of art, not just in New York galleries, but locally and regionally, by collecting that work. That's among the most important things a collector can do.
You know, the other thing that I think is really important, and I didn't realize this when we started Art Bridges, Darren, but most of the museums around the country don't have an acquisition budget. They just don't. And so they can't fix the problem they've got, that it's all male white men on their walls. They don't have the funds to fix it. So one of the most important things each of us can do, you know, we've really focused on diverse artists and women artists in our collection, and the reason is really simple. That's what these museums don't have and can't get. And so we can be the bridge, again, to help supply that and fix the holes in their collections. But I'd also encourage you all to look at that in terms of your own museum affiliations and that need.
And also going back to the HBU, going back to the support for HBCUs. So we toured Spellman's collection.
Yeah.
And so there are great diverse collections out there. Yeah. It's just a matter of then matchmaking and bringing those together.
Yeah.
So we're about out of time. Alice, we talked about art, but the amazing thing about you that most people don't know who know you through Alice Walton, the great art patroness, is that there's another part of you that is Alice Walton, the radical trying to change healthcare in America. So in this last couple of minutes, talk about the other half of your brain, philanthropy brain, working on this idea of transforming healthcare, and particularly health service delivery in poorer communities, rural communities, like Northwest Arkansas, where there, just as with art, is not a representation of medical support.
I really am crazy, but my tennis shoes say it all. My friend Jewel, the singer, had her kids in her mental health group make these tennis shoes for me, and they say, "Art heals and nature heals," and I really believe that. And I actually, Darren, it goes back, I had a very serious injury and chronic situation for 12 years. And it was really my watercolors that kind of brought me through it and kept my sanity. So I've always had this strong connection. I've always believed there's a huge connection in well-being and positive mindsets and art. And so the experience I had kind of has always made me interested in healthcare. So what we're really trying to do is we've started a new med school. In fact, the accreditation agencies are there today. Whee! I'm glad I'm here. We started a foundation called the Whole Health Institute, but I really believe that doctors need to be trained to keep people healthy and to put mental health back in the middle of health care. I believe we have a huge mental health crisis in this country and in the world. And a good part of that is because we've kept it in the closet for so long. And it has to be brought to the forefront. So we're just going step by step. We're also working with major healthcare institutions to bring better specialty care to our region. One of the things that I'm really interested in, rural America is in a huge healthcare crisis. Just an example, Arkansas has 4 counties without a doctor. Not cities, counties. We have 8 counties without a hospital. Arkansas is not unique. That's throughout this country. So we really have total lack of access. And one of the things we're exploring is how can AI and virtual care, what can it do to change access to health care in rural America? So these are the kind of issues that we're working on, but most importantly, the Whole Health Institute and the med school sit on the Crystal Bridges campus, and Art Bridges and Crystal Bridges are working with the med school to really integrate the arts. The burnout rate and the suicide rate in the healthcare industry is horrific. And so we're trying to create a better environment for learning and practice by integrating the arts.
So when you visit Bentonville and you go to the area where the museum, I mean, you have really constructed this massive set of edifices that are this new medical school, this new headquarters for the Whole Health Institute, Crystal Bridges, Art Bridges. It is truly Alice in Wonderland. I mean, you have created, I mean, it truly, I mean, when I went the first time, it was just a beautiful rolling hills, but you have architecturally, it is astonishing. It is absolutely astonishing. And it has made it such that people you wouldn't expect, and again, I'm speaking with my prejudice as a New Yorker, to say, wow, I'm going to move to Bentonville. As you know, when I was there a couple of trips ago, when I went to meet with staff at the Walmart, the first person who greeted me was the head of the LGBT employee resource group, who was a black gay man who was married and living in Washington with his husband and transferred to Bentonville. And he said, the reason we came here is because of all the culture. And my husband likes riding bicycles. So anyway, please thank Alice Walton and Ann Craybell.